recognizes the ranking member for opening statement. I yield to the ranking member for an opening statement. I yield back.
Good morning, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Distinguished gentlelady from California, Mary Bono.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Chair now recognizes
the lady from California is recognized.
I'm pleased to introduce Congresswoman Mary Bono, former U.S. Representative for California's Inland Empire and Desert Region from 1998 to 2013.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Welcome to Sagely Speaking. I'm your host, Mary Bono. Let's get right to our guest today because we've got a lot to talk about. Virginia State's Secretary of Public Safety and Homeland Security, Terrance or Terry Cole, is with us. He has over 28 years of law enforcement experience and success, 22 years of which were with the Federal Drug Enforcement Administration, which is where we have some mutual friends and lots to talk about. But let's get right into our questions. And as I speak to you, Mr. Secretary, today we are in the midst of the week where we are going to commemorate 9/11. And I know I was actually living in Virginia on 9/11, very close to the Pentagon, and I know what a big day it is for all of us in the United States, but certainly Virginians as well, because of the plane that hit the Pentagon, let alone everything else that happened. Can you reflect on 9/11 a little bit for us and share your thoughts? What's on your mind right now?
Yeah, and thank you so much for this opportunity. And I think this morning, the governor and I, along with his cabinet, said a prayer in reference to 9/11, just remembering all those true patriots that were there at the Pentagon and at the Twin Towers. And it's really a time for us to reflect on so many sacrifices that Americans make every single day, and remember that terrorism is still a top national priority security concern of this great nation. And we lost approximately about 185 Virginians that day on 9/11. And throughout the years of conflict in Afghanistan, we lost another 37 Virginians that were serving their country and representing good over evil. So for me, it's a very troubling moments to remember that the effects of terrorism and what it plays in reference to our national security. But it's also a time to honor those folks that not only serve their country on the battlefield, but that represent the best in what the United States has to offer.
Very well said. And when I think back of how I was feeling that day, I think prior to the first tower being hit, we had a malaise. We all had a sense that everything was fine in America and we were protected and this would never come home to roost. And it did. And then by the end of the day, of course, I think we were all in shock. But it gets me to where we are in so many places right now. But when I think back about this wake-up call that we got, again, as a member of Congress, on that day, I was a sitting member of Congress. And I believed things were different than they were. We had been warned in the QDR, the Defense Review, that we would be attacked sometime on U.S. soil within the next decade or even 25 years, 9/11. And I think this gets me to, are our heads in the sand again, whether it's the terrorism that we see coming from the Middle East or whether it's the cartels coming over our southern border? Where are we? Where's our psyche in our country? Are our heads in the sand?
Yeah, I think we are still in that mindset. And I think that there's so many dynamic things that plague us today in the United States. And I think that, whether it's the Chinese sending precursors, chemicals into Mexico and the Mexican cartels exploiting an open border and just sending this poison, whether it's cocaine, whether it's methamphetamine, whether it's fentanyl, to the United States. We have serious national security concerns on our southern border, dealing with Mexico, dealing with China, and still to this day, we are dealing with major issues in Afghanistan. We are dealing with issues that red lights are blinking, right? We hear the director of the FBI telling us that time and time again over the last year or so. And I think even after the 9/11 Commission report, the walls in these silos are higher than they've ever been. We are not, in my opinion, the federal government is not addressing these serious national security concerns. And I believe they directly start at the border. They directly start in Mexico and China and all these foreign adversaries that are looking to destroy the United States of America.
Well, I agree with you on the border, absolutely. But when we do look back 9/11, Of course, they didn't come through over the border. They came in, through our airports. In different ways, student visas. Let's go through the whole list of these problems. And then, look, this week we read a story about Iran talking about assassinating people like Nikki Haley and President Trump, President Biden, other American politicians and military leaders. That seems to me that would be pretty easy to get a bunch of people over the southern border, bring them in and have them on standby, execute such orders. Am I thinking like Tom Clancy? Am I out of my mind, or is that a scenario that we could see play out?
Yeah, I think it's a very real scenario that most Americans don't have an in-depth understanding of, just based on the pure volume of people that have come across the border illegally, just based on the pure number of terrorists that are confirmed that have come across the border, and not having a general understanding of where people are in our own country. They have not been properly vetted. They have not been properly put through systems and policies that have been in place for years. And I always use the analogy, when I was a DEA agent working in South America, for us to parole somebody into the United States just to be a witness for a day, that process would take 5 to 6 months and hundreds of pieces of paperwork in reference to proper vetting just to escort this person in under this parole process that we're seeing play out within minutes on the border each day to allow people to come into our country. And you had to allow this person to come in, a single entrance, they would testify, and then they would leave the next day. But yet we're seeing that same process that was used and put in place years ago as a simple convenience for people to illegally cross our border and then illegally stay in our country.
It's mind-boggling, for sure, how we can do this. But if you were a federal government role at that level, what would you do differently? Look, the border has been porous for decades. And whether it's Republican House and Senate and White House or Democrat, this is where we are. And I don't know why the political will isn't there when we know the threat is this big. What would you do differently? Were you sitting in the cabinet level position at the White House?
Yeah, I think, if I was in that position, you need to properly educate people in reference to the threats that are out there. You need to properly educate how Mexico's been a failing state for years, and how they are so easily taken under the wing by some of these other communist terrorist countries that allow, for example, the precursors to flow in there. Now we're seeing Mexico turn into a terror training camp, similar to what we saw in the Middle East years ago. The majority of foreign fighters and their organizations coming into Mexico, setting up base camps, allowing the Mexicans to not only hone their trade craft of dumping all this poison into the United States, but now they're using military-type intelligence collection against U.S. officials, using military-type collection when it comes to the border operations, using drone operations in Mexico, similar that we're seeing play out on the battlefield with the Ukraine and Russia conflict. These are serious national security concerns, and I think you have to continue to educate our legislators on both sides of the aisle as to the threats that having an open border and allowing these organizations to operate with impunity within Mexico and the easy access now to the United States with the open border, that we really need to address the multi-pronged approach towards holding Mexico accountable for their actions, holding China accountable for their actions. You had mentioned Iran. Back years ago at DEA, and I hate to throw, these analogies out years ago, but DEA worked Operation Cassandra, which was a global operation. You can Google it and bring it up, and you will see that at that time, Hezbollah and Hamas were key negotiators when it came to illegal narcotics, specifically cocaine, being purchased all over the world. And they controlled a good portion of the money laundering that was going on at the time. And DEA basically at the time presented all this information, not only to the Department of Justice, but to the National Security Council and informed them and educated them. And at the time, there was other more important things, I guess you could say, at the federal government that were going on in reference to the Iran negotiations. And at that time, Mary, DEA was basically told to stand down of investigating this global narco-trafficking terrorist organization that was using drug proceeds to fuel Hezbollah and Hamas. And this was, probably 15 years ago that this was transpiring. And these are major concerns that still exist today on how we see this illegal flow of not only money, but now foreign fighters globally that are all wanting to do damage here in the United States. And it's a serious concern that we have here in the Commonwealth. And it's a serious concern that we need to do a better job continuing to educate our leadership, not only at the White House and the cabinet level meetings, but at the State Department and at the Attorney General's office, at the Department of Justice. These are hard topics. These are hard questions, but they're what's right to protect the sovereignty, not only of the United States of America, but to properly represent our citizens that expect us daily to do what's right.
It's a good opportunity for me to point out the failure of the Secret Service to protect President Trump. And I think it's sort of an indication of the larger problems. You mentioned the silos that we see in the federal government. On 9/11, we were shocked to learn how siloed everybody was. And we worked for a long time to improve communications, buy new communications equipment, do everything we could to break down those silos and coordinate. But when you mention these silos, I want to get into your work and your leadership, because I understand in the state of Virginia, you've worked hard to break down those silos, and you've got a number of programs where you're working interagency-wide very effectively. But how come we can't seem to remove these silos? Is it egos? Is it communications equipment? Is it lack of political leadership? Or we need these agencies to cooperate and coordinate?
Yeah, and it's essential. And I think one of the things that we quickly learned here when our team came in to support the governor in his vision and mission and execute the game plan was we fully understand we need to work strongly with our federal partners here in Virginia. We have a very robust cadre of state troopers that are assigned to all the federal task force here in the Commonwealth. But more importantly, for me, it was important for me to have that personal relationship with the heads of the DEA, with the heads of CBP, with the heads of HSI and the FBI, and to make those office calls and to clearly set the bar high for what it could be and what it should be, and then aggressively move towards execution. And the execution of those plans are to bring a holistic approach. Virginians expect their state government to function. And to function, you need their input, you need their trust, you need to be accountable to them, and you need to serve them. And to serve them in the best way possible is through actions. And those actions are to protect Virginians. And sometimes the federal priorities do not align with the state priorities, but we can always find a way to work together. You must find a way to get to yes. And some of those are hard conversations, but in the Commonwealth, we're willing to have those hard conversations. We're willing to hold those federal entities and task force and law enforcement to account, because if they are not going to do it, we will. And that's what Virginians expect us to do. And I think that's why our success has been partly because it is a true team working together, not only from the law enforcement aspect, but from the NGOs and all the private sector people in Virginia that have come together and support law enforcement and back the blue. Just bring common sense. Backing the blue has meant a lot. And it's been a lot for the morale of law enforcement here in the Commonwealth. And when you bring them all together, and you take clear direction, and you have objectives you want to accomplish, and you hold people accountable for their jobs, it's amazing what can happen. And we're proud of some of our accomplishments, but Mary, we have a ton of work to do. And we need to continue to, as the governor says, stay on our front foot, stay aggressive, and continue to empower our first responders, our men and women that are on the front lines to do their job, stand behind them, and continue to support them. And one of the objectives that we tackled right off the bat with our team was we wanted to have an impact on fentanyl. We wanted to have an impact on reducing the poisonings here in the Commonwealth. And that's not easy with an open border. That's not easy with heavy cartel influence that has moved into Virginia. That's not easy with, certain powers have been taken away from law enforcement here in Virginia over the years, not under this governor, I should say, but there has been a pullback in recent years to support law enforcement. But we've changed that cycle here in Virginia. And one of the things that we wanted to do was work together on this fentanyl problem. And we launched Operation Free Virginia. And it was a comprehensive approach. And what we wanted to do is, recognize how much fentanyl we had here in the Commonwealth. We wanted to reduce supply. We wanted to increase our enforcement, and we wanted to eradicate this poison and send it back to Mexico. And through the month of, we did a 30-day law enforcement surge with our federal partners with 114 localities of law enforcement in Virginia. And the results are just astonishing. During that 30 days, we seized 51 pounds of powder fentanyl. That's roughly about 12.5 million lethal dosage units. Kill every Virginian one time and then start back around again. And we wanted to continue to educate our public as well. We did a lot of PSA announcements. We were in the schools, college campuses. We had the truckers involved that put the different slogans on trucks. And we wanted to ensure that the word was getting out because these cartels are targeting our kids. These cartels are targeting people that are trying to work their way through addiction, trying to beat addiction. They are taking the worst elements, the cartels are, and trying to exploit them. And when you bring that many people together and you bring the federal resources together, you see a true positive effect. And we have seen a reduction in fentanyl poisonings month over month for almost the last 18 months. But we have a ton of work yet to do.
We'll continue with our interview in a moment, but first I'd like to thank my sponsors. Lucy Pet Foods is the leader in gut health. Their formulas for life feature prebiotic, balanced fiber that nourishes your dog and cat's total health. Every purchase helps support the Lucy Pet Foundation, a 501c3 charity helping animals. Save 15% off your first order and use the promo code SAGELYSPEAKING, all one word, and you will get free shipping at lucypetfoods.com. If you're committed to tackling the opioid and addiction crises, then you need to be at the 2025 RX Summit. Use code SAGELY, that's SAGELY, for an extra $100 off. Join top experts and professionals as we share strategies for prevention, deflection, treatment, and recovery. Don't miss this chance to be part of the change. Head over to rx-summit.com to register now. That's rx-summit.com for an additional $100 off. And a thank you to Mothers Against Prescription Drug Abuse, driving solutions to prevent drug abuse and overdose deaths by focusing on prevention through education and awareness. Go to mapta.net for more information. And now, back to our interview.
Mr. Secretary, when I look at you and think about the job you're doing and all of the responsibilities you have, I mean, it's a 360 set of issues you have, not only the law enforcement perspective, but also, again, educating families. And you might know that I run a small nonprofit also focused on this problem. And one thing I've encountered is that so often parents and anybody thinks this problem's not going to hit me. I keep using heads in the sand. I guess that's that's my word of the day, heads of the sand, or my phrase for the day. But parents just think, I've had a mother once say to me, I don't need to worry about fentanyl because my kid's a good kid. And that's sort of my phrase to say to people, it's everybody's problem. Good. This is happening to good kids too. It's happening. Any kid doesn't deserve this. 50 years ago, people had room, or maybe 30 years ago, I don't know when, but people had room to make mistakes. You could dabble in something and most likely survive it. And now there's no room for a mistake. The DEA's campaign, One Pill Can Kill, says it all. So how are you talking to parents? Are they listening? They must be listening to your message because the trend is reversing. You have good news there. But I would assume it's still a hurdle, that people still think this is somebody else's problem.
It is. And, when I first took office about 17 months ago, I would call 2 fentanyl moms a day who had lost their son and daughter. I can never understand or be in their position of knowing their grief, but I wanted to listen to them. I wanted to learn from them, and I wanted to include them in this journey. And they are a big part of this journey. They are a big part of the governor's initiative. They're a big part of the governor's listens and then acts. He's put bills into place here in Virginia to help protect kids. He's put bills to make pill presses fentanyl charges here in Virginia, which is very forward-leaning. He's advocating for the felony homicide bill. But these are the things the moms are bringing to us. These are the grassroots movements that really cause change. And I welcome them in my office. I give them all my phone number to call me. And because if it's important to them, or we have the opportunity, Mary, to save one child, we're going to do it. So it's a multi-pronged approach, and it's difficult from the aspects of seeing their pain, but it's important to me that they know their government, their state government cares about them, and we're willing to react and address the issues that they bring forward. And they are very active, Mary. Let me tell you, my wife, Joy, I've been married to for 34 years. She said, you never stand behind Mama Bear and a cub because you're going to lose that battle. You are going to lose. These moms are going to fight for the legacy of their kids.
I know a lot of them too, and I agree with you, and it's unfortunate, we talk about this a lot, but you and I know hundreds and thousands of parents who've lost a child. What disheartens me is that we're going to meet more, that this problem is far from over. And that's the heartbreaking part, is that when I started this work in about 2007, when it was prescription pills, which I understand you have also confiscated a lot of those, but it has morphed so much. And I have really learned that I hate in my travels to meet new parents who have lost a child. It really is heartbreaking, and it motivates me to do my work and have conversations with amazing people like you. But let me ask you something. But again, your 360 job, I know that you care a lot about your first responders and their health and their well-being, and you mentioned their morale. Can you talk a little bit about that, and what does this look like, and the pullback and the assaults and the insults and all of that our first responders have received over the past handful of years? It's bewildering. But can you talk about that? It's fantastic to hear that you're increasing and supporting those first responders. How are you doing that? What are you doing?
Yeah, the first thing for us is to listen to them and be accountable to them. We hold weekly and monthly calls with all our chiefs, with all our sheriffs, with all our fire, EMS, first responders. And then it's important for me to be present and important to listen to their concerns and bring their concerns back and then act upon them. And I think when you have a governor that stands in front of the public on a daily basis and say, I back the blue, I care for our first responders, I care for their wellness, their retention, and their mental health well-being, that says a lot, not only to stand there and say those words, but then put forth those actions, such as better pay is important, better training is important, providing well over $1 billion back to municipalities to go buy equipment, to go buy training, to update their computer systems. But more importantly, we need to continue to attract the best and brightest to Virginia. I think the CNBC, number one best for business in the Commonwealth of Virginia, always helps to attract great business, but we need to continue to attract great law enforcement. And we need to stand behind not only our law enforcement, but our first responders. And we need to make sure we have proper screening for our firefighters. We need to ensure that we provide them with every skill set that they need, because their job, Barry, as we know, is ever changing. That when you dial 911, you never know what you're going to respond to. And that's why we need to ensure that we continue to bring in the best and brightest and to listen to their concerns, act upon their concerns, but always stand behind them. And I think this dialogue that we have, whether it's daily or weekly with our law enforcement leaders, is critical. And I'll give you an example. I had the opportunity to fly down to the Breaks, Virginia on Friday. That is in the southwestern northern part of the country where Tennessee and Kentucky and Virginia come together. And I had the opportunity to stand in front of 65 chiefs and sheriffs. Now, the southwestern part of the state is often forgotten because of Northern Virginia and Richmond. But that was my 18th trip since I've been in office to the Southwest to listen and to be accountable for the people that we represent. I have the privilege to serve them. I'm a servant leader. Those conversations that we have are very enjoyable, but sometimes they're very humbling, and sometimes they are right on point with, we need to do more. And we're going to continue to support them and do more. But it's important for me to be present and be accountable to them, because that's who we represent.
I don't know how long it's been since anybody has thanked you for your service as a DEA agent, but I want to thank you right now. And I'm wondering if we can pivot a little bit. You're one of these guests, actually all of my guests I could speak to for hours, and you're one of those. But your career, Let's talk about your years in the DEA. Do you have some great stories you want to share? I think people obviously they love the DEA perspective and this swashbuckling nature of being a DEA agent. Is it all swashbuckling or what's it like?
I say it was the best job ever, Mary. And when you have an opportunity, I'm from a law enforcement family. And, my goal in life was to be a uniformed police officer. I wanted to be that in the worst way of my life. And I was to follow in the legacy. But then I met a DEA recruiter in college, and I was like, I think I want to do that as well. So when the opportunity came to me and I accepted a position with DEA, I told my grandfather, who happened to have been on in New York for 38 years, that I was going to join the federal government. And he wouldn't talk to me for 4 days, right? Because that's the old school New Yorker coming out at him, joining DEA. But the reason why I wanted to join DEA was obviously for the drug war at the time. But I wanted my kids to grow up diverse. I wanted my kids to experience different cultures. I wanted my kids to explore different countries. And I wanted them to remember and see how great this country was each time we came home. And my first foreign post was in Colombia. And I went to Bogota. And there was a chief of operations at the time, Mike Braun, who I love dearly, assigned me to go to Bogota and to work down there. And it was probably for a kid from Western New York to go to Colombia at the heart of the drug war and work with so many amazing people and work with so many amazing Colombian National Police officers for my tour there. It was really the height at the beginning because I had a great crew that I was working with on a weekly basis in Cali, Colombia, that we were doing amazing things, not only with technology, but with seizures and personal development of the Colombian National Police and standing up operations and really establishing them as being the forerunner of the drug war, but working some of the biggest corruption cases against some of the highest level Colombian government officials in my career, to the point where we were hitting cocaine loads of 1,000 kilos, 2,000 kilos, 5,000 kilos, working undercover with a partner where they delivered us 1,500 kilos of cocaine and 63 kilos of heroin on the tarmac in 2004 in a private Lear is pretty cool stuff. Let me tell you.
Yeah.
But on May 22nd, 2006, that's when it all came crashing down for me. My team was on a law enforcement movement in Homeland, Colombia, and my law enforcement team was attacked by the Colombian military. And they were attacked because they were doing the right thing. They were working with the Americans. They were patriots for their country. And on that day, May 22nd, 2006, I lost 10 people. 10 people that worked for the United States government through the Colombian National Police. 10 people that were patriots for their country, but loved our country and loved everything that we represented. And it was probably the hardest day of my life, from going from the epicenter of the drug world and success to losing people under your command that believed in you and believed in what they stood for and what they were doing. It was probably the most challenging times of my life. My family was evacuated a couple of days later, and we stayed in country, and we ended up convicting all the Colombian military members that ambushed the Colombian police members, and they're probably still all in jail on war crimes down in Colombia. But it gave me a sense of the global impact and the global reach and power that not only DEA had, but what the U.S. government did was just absolutely amazing.
I could ask you what keeps you up at night, but I think you've said a lot what keeps you up at night. But what's important, if we go back to where I started this conversation, we cannot afford to have this malaise or the heads in the sands about these threats to America. They are huge. Would you agree with me that they are larger than they've ever been, the threats to our country? Right now, it's as if we have an Axis power again, that these countries are coming together solely with one purpose in mind, and that is to destroy the U.S. and our way of life. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, Mary, and I think what's, to just amplify that is, with that open border, they're all here now. Before it was, we were dealing with foreign adversaries in their land, much further away from the United States, but they're all here. And I think that's part of the problem. Part of the problem with this immigration and the open border, that all these adversarial countries, all these bad actors, they're in this country and they've just walked across the border and they've set up in hometown USA. It doesn't matter where it is. We're all feeling the effects in this chemical warfare that China and Mexico have really undertaken against the United States. This is just something that we need strong leadership in the White House. We need strong leadership at the State Department and at DOJ to handle these complex issues. If we don't handle them, can we continue to lose over 100,000 Americans every single year just to drug issues? I don't think we can. And I don't think we should stand for it, not only as citizens, but as patriots and defenders of this great country. We cannot allow this to continue. We need strong leadership. We need people that are willing to address these issues head on. And from the Commonwealth perspective, we will work with anybody to keep our citizens safe.
Do you mind talking about school shootings?
Yeah, I'm happy to discuss that. And I think, extremely tragic, especially the recent school shooting in Georgia. But we need to take a hard look at some of these red flags that were presented early on. And we need to ensure that when these things come to our preview, when law enforcement is notified, we need to act and we need to investigate and we need to share that information as best we can to keep the public informed. I think one of the things that we've done really well, we're probably the nation leader here in Virginia, is making sure our schools are staffed with school resource officers, law enforcement, school security officers as well, and that we continue to provide great quality law enforcement services and continue to be there and listen to the problem set, understand the problem set, and act upon it. We need to make sure that those kids in that school and those teachers are safe and sound, and we need to act appropriately.
Well, thank you. It is a sad reality, and I think that the cautionary tales, I wouldn't even say cautionary tales, but worse than that. It sounds like we need to harden our culture a little bit right now. Our schools, our daily life, we need to be vigilant. We need to close the border for sure. But even then, so many of these people are in the country with the intent to do harm that it deserves a new way of looking at things. Unfortunately, the harsh reality. So I have gone on. I've taken a lot of your time today, Mr. Secretary, and I know how busy you are. I just want to thank you for your leadership. Again, I lived in Virginia for years. I love Virginia. I miss it. But your leadership is exemplary. And the way in which you coordinate interagency-wide, the reality you have, that you understand the perils that we're faced with, not only the U.S., but globally, which does affect us all. So I want to thank you for your service at the DEA and now at the state of Virginia, and hope that we can work with you. We do focus a lot on education campaigns for parents and students. So maybe we'll be knocking on your door, bugging you a little bit about seeing how we can work together. But again, Mr. Secretary, thank you very much for your time. I thank your staff for helping getting you on here, and to Mike Braun for making this possible. I would like to thank my sponsors. Without you, I could not make this podcast possible. I'd also like to thank you, my listeners, and ask if you like this podcast, please like and share. We would greatly appreciate that. And until we meet again, I wish you perfect health and happiness. See you soon.